University Executive Program Network. I think I've probably facilitated close to 40 executive programs. All my favorite ones have been in Brazil. We can talk more about that later. When I am not doing Singularity executive programs, I am a principal at a boutique learning and innovation consultancy called Radical. And I'm also the co-founder and facilitation chief of an event experience engagement agency called Trajectory. And then I do a little bit of moonlighting at the Stanford D School as an advisor on futures education projects. But I'm excited to get into it. And I think our first question is coming from Carlos.
So thank you, Jeff. Uh, my question to you actually it's two combined in one.
Ah, sneaky.
Yeah, when we speak about the future, and AI is one of the topics, but of the many trends and signs that we see about the future, which ones do you think are misleading or just overhyped or wrong? And at the same time, what are the weak signals that you think are underestimated?
Mm. Yeah, two big questions to kick us off. And I know I have to be very careful when someone asks me about the AI future when I know that they're building a lot of AI at Globo. So I, again, feel like you have a strong perspective on this. But I think one of the trends that is maybe uh, overvalued and perhaps misunderstood is some of the projections I see for the speed of transformation as things are automated. And there are folks who have a vision that it's going to be like flipping a switch and that all of a sudden everything is going to be running on agentic systems, that it's all going to be heavily and highly autonomous and integrated. And I think that is probably over-indexing on capability and undervaluing the challenge of reliability. And I think in the real world, the integration of systems and tools is actually going to be perhaps quite a bit more challenging than many leaders estimate. Now, does this mean that we should just sit back and wait because we have lots and lots of time because there's more friction than we think? No, because that time is really valuable, right? That time is for experimentation. It's for learning. It's for actually thinking about how do we meaningfully align and layer systems? How do we get them to speak with the infrastructure that we might kind of be stuck with, that we have to continue to make work and make interoperable? But when people have a vision of kind of an overnight switch to autonomous agentic operations, I think that's probably going to be misleading.
And which signs that you think are underestimated or the weak signs that we are not paying the the, the attention that
Yeah,
it should?
yeah. So I think some of this is probably space dependent. I don't know if we'll get around at any point to talking about, say, fast moving consumer goods, products of that sort. I think anyone who's not thinking pretty heavily about what search and discovery looks like in an increasingly automated, agentic search and commerce environment, I think that's something that they can easily be undervaluing. Thinking about how radically those channels could change when we're not just handing off workflows and work, but also thinking about the management of the household, the management of your refrigerator and your kitchen. How do you keep your products in front of consumers? And when you have a new product, how do you actually bring that thing to market? The old days of search engine optimization, I think that's rapidly falling behind, and people are going to have to adapt. Now, that's pretty specific. Another thing that I think is maybe undervalued that is more broad is I believe that there is going to be, at some point, a pretty strong policy and legislative response to this wave of automation. And at the point that that kicks in, I think it's going to do a lot to determine what the future landscape and playing field looks like. And I think a lot of times we can kind of forget about those interdependencies between the political and the legal domains and everything that we see in technology. Tech is really important, but it's not everything. And it's certainly not the only thing. So keeping an eye on what's going on kind of socially and politically, what's starting to percolate in policy discussions, I think is actually going to be really beneficial in the long term for leaders. You tell me what I'm missing.
No, no,
Okay.
maybe later.
Later. All right.
But
Mauricio.
let's deep dive on that topic and talk more about the leadership capabilities
Mm.
related to this whole trend or the hype, as Carlos mentioned
Yeah,
here.
somebody has to do it, right?
Yeah,
If
Yeah.
points that actually and but I'll allow you to go ahead with your question. Maybe I put a comment on that.
so I wonder if you could guide us a little bit through the topic of the agentic leadership. Peter Drucker used to say that leadership is essentially a human capability. Is that changing with this new scenario, and how? And uh, what differs? What really differs uh, the agentic leader, the true authentic agentic leadership, from what is common, ordinary automation process in this sense?
Yeah, I love this. This is one where I feel like we could pour the wine and go on all night. There are a lot of perspectives on this, right? And um, I don't have the answer, but I have answers. I have ideas, and I imagine you have some as well. So I would love to hear you respond, and Carlos, you as well. And as we continue to move down the line, don't hesitate to come back to a previous topic and question. We can have this continue to flow. But in my mind, there's a really interesting conversational space to explore here where we look at the increasing use of agents on one hand, and then the perhaps decline in agency of humans on the other hand. And I think we need to be really, really careful about what we offload and how. There's already a lot of conversation about uh, de-skilling and kind of cognitive decline where people start to rely on their agents and their AI assistants quite a bit for execution and ideation. And I think we need to be quite intentional about what things do we want to have automated, what things do we want to kind of hand off, and where do we really want to continue to exercise our own agency as leaders. And one of the places that might be a little bit counterintuitive when we think about leadership, and I'm going to come back to this Drucker idea, it's a uniquely human thing. I like a definition of leadership as it's something that you do. It's not just something that you are, right? That to be a leader, you have to actually exercise leadership, that it is something that you do actively. And I think just deploying agentic tools and systems, having a swarm of agents, having a team of agents, that doesn't actually mean that you're leading them or leading anything else with purpose and intention, exercising your agency as a human with values. I think one of the things that we can't stop doing is thinking about the questions that we ask. We have great tools now that are machines for generating answers, but to make the most of them, they still need good questions. We still need to be directing them with questions, and questions are how we humans continue to learn. They're how we evolve. They're how we can drive our communities, our organizations forward. And I think that is something that still really depends on us. And we have the opportunity to not only do it, but to really do it well and maybe even do it better. Think about what are the most important questions to be answering? What are the questions that we aren't even asking yet? Rather than asking the same old questions and getting more faster answers, maybe there are new questions that we need to be dreaming up, that we need to be devising. And then also the idea that maybe the leader that matters is the one who asks the best questions. And that's a shift from kind of the old model of leadership, right? Where the leader was supposed to show up with all the answers. Right? That's kind of what we've been rewarded for. That's what we've been socialized to do. And I think there's a model of leadership that's actually more adaptive that is the one who shows up with the best questions and recognizes they don't need to have all the answers. They may have their systems that can do it. They also should have their people. And if the leader is limited only to what they know, the answers they have, then the organization is going to be limited by that leader's imagination and creativity. On the other hand, if the leader is able to find people to help them come up with the best answers to the rich questions, then I think you have an exponential space of opportunity to explore together.
Jeff, we are seeing a lot of agents being a formal part of the organizational chart in some companies, and sometimes doing part of the work, sometimes doing all the work. Uh, how to deal with the psychological safety of people dealing with these new agents all the time, feeling somehow threatened by them, somehow helped by them? How to manage this psychological safety part?
I think this is probably one of the most fraught questions of this kind of transitional time and space. And it's one where I definitely don't pretend to have all the answers. I am wary, actually, of any tendency to treat agentic systems as coworkers and refer to them as though they are members of the team. I far prefer a framing where we look at them as tools and, really valuable systems. But I don't really like the idea of asking people to think of their AI agents as coworkers and members of the team. I think that's actually setting us up for a lot of confusion and maybe down the line some more psychological challenges and problems. In the near term, I think it's actually really important to be clear about what do we value from our human team members. Make sure as leaders that we're modeling those behaviors. Make sure that we're clearly communicating what they are, why they're valued, what we want to see, what our human teams can continue to invest in to grow and upskill and excel, and making clear paths for that. I think we really don't want to wind up with an organizational structure where it looks like we're asking people to train their AI agentic replacements. No one wants to work in that organization. They're also not going to do good work for that organization. If you tell me that my new AI agentic coworker is going to be, brought up to speed, and I have the sense that maybe eventually take my position, I'm going to do everything I can to undermine that process and to make sure that it does not succeed. And I think that's one trap we can fall into. And another related one is falling into kind of an automation trap where all we do is find more efficient ways of doing the things we've always done. The real opportunity is thinking about freeing up more capability, more energy, more resources to do new things, to do better things, to do bigger things. And I think to do that, we need to make clear to our people and clear in our strategic narrative of the AI journey that we're not just trying to automate everything as it is today. Instead, we're trying to leverage automation to help us build into a bigger and better tomorrow. It's going to have more opportunities for people to move into.
It's sorry, Guy, I prefer
Now, let's do it, man.
material.
Yeah.
Yes, on that, it is a very strong statement, or this point of view about what the agents are for an organization. I'd love to hear your opinion on this rush of the creation of unicorns with no employees and at all. How do you see that?
Can you name one?
Not yet, but the what we hear here is the rush to that some are
Maybe. We'll see. I think there's a really important distinction, though, between something that is built today from the ground up where the entire organization design and all of the systems and all of the infrastructure that that organization will run on and the business model is built around and that the value proposition ultimately is supported with, that all of that is, I mean, if you want to call it AI native, fine, but that it is built today for tomorrow from the ground up. I think that's a very different organization design than thinking about how do we take an incumbent organization and realign it to succeed in this AI enabled or agentic future. And I don't actually think that those models will look the same or need to look the same. And just because an organization can be built bootstrapped with a very few people at the top and then a whole lot of agentic coordination underneath it doesn't mean that that's what we should try to turn all of our organizations into. I think at least for a good long while, you might have some of both, right? I think there's going to be a very small number that are new, and sure, try to build them that way. But rushing to try to transform our organizations into that model, I think is actually setting ourselves up for probably disaster. We'll see.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming here once again.
My pleasure.
I will switch a little bit of the subject and come with a question more related to ethics. And in a world that we're not communicating to other countries, well, we're being more protectionist than we have been the past few years with the end of the globalization. How do you see the necessity of building or regulating AI? And in the case of not regulating, who could you blame if AI harm us somehow?
Who do we blame? One answer would be ourselves. I think the question of who to blame is probably less fruitful than thinking about what kind of future do we want to create societally and sort of working back from there, what needs to be in place. And hopefully we don't get to the point of having to ask who do we blame for the disaster we've wound up with. I mean, there'll be plenty of people. We can point at a tech company, or we can go further back. We can point at capitalism. You know, there are lots of places that we'll be able to point the finger, but instead, I wonder if we can start to work toward a place where we won't have to do that. We won't need to do that. And that gets to the question of what kinds of conversations and also what kinds of advocacy, perhaps, do we need to see to move toward ethical frameworks and ethical policy being implemented. I don't think that's an easy thing. I'm not even sure that it's a likely thing. But I think if it doesn't happen, we're going to wind up in a situation where we realize belatedly something has to be done, right? At some point, I think there will be serious policy intervention. And the question is, can we do it before, or do we have to do it after we feel like we're forced to? I think that's probably going to play out different ways in different countries, different ecosystems. Already you can see that China has a very different approach to regulating and developing the industry than is the case in the United States, for example. And I think there are a lot of countries that are probably going to be kind of caught in between those. And, you know, there's the question of what happens at the official level nationally, and then also the question of what happens at the organizational level, right? And even at the individual level of leading teams and the individual level of raising children. You know, we may not all have an opportunity to weigh in on how systems are designed and developed, but we do certainly have an opportunity to exercise our own agency in how they're deployed in our organizations. You know, where do we find lines that we really want to honor that are not going to be crossed? Where do we want to make sure that we're not running risks that are untenable for the organization? And then I think that kind of scale up for society too. You know, what are safe to fail experiments, and what are experiments that like we really aren't ready to run yet? Beyond that, I don't have the answers on this. I think it's something that is probably woefully behind the development of the technology is the development of the policy framework to ensure that the technology is deployed in a way that aligns with human values and human systems thriving.
Like,
Let's get you the microphone, make sure it picks up for the people online.
and you said that you don't like agents as coworkers, and you talk a little, continuing to be a leader and doing something. How will you the leaders of the future in where there is a proliferation of agents, this type will change radically, or it will be the same profiles that we have of leaders today and character?
Shift between the leader as the one with all the answers, expected to have all the answers, and the leader who instead shows up with the best questions and finds the people and the tools and builds the systems to help her come up with the best answers, maybe many of which she never could have thought of. That's a shift I would love to see. I think there are other shifts that we're going to want to see as well. I would love to see the profile of leadership in large organizations change, like what the leaders actually look like. I think there's a real opportunity there to bring in a more diverse profile of leaders. I'd love to see more women running large organizations, running governments. I think that would actually be beneficial for everyone. I would love to see people from more diverse backgrounds. I would love to see more people who are younger. In the United States right now, at the level of our congressional leadership, we have a lot of people who are really, really old. And with that age and experience may come some wisdom, but you also have a lot of people who are not even going to be around for the future that they are determining and designing with policy, for example. Now, within the organization, and this question about what does leadership look like as you have these new tools, and as it is in some sense more of hybrid, where you're working with a lot more non-human agents. I think there I might see that as I need a leader and a manager. And very often in the course of my career in leadership development, I've been pushing more on we need to build up the leader part, not better managers. I think in this model, we're going to need both. We need people who can manage these agentic systems and swarms. I don't think that that's the same set of competencies as leading a team of humans. And I think we're going to want both. And I think we're going to want leaders who can lead humans who are managing agentic systems, and leaders who can lead humans who are augmented through these AI capabilities.
They are students, and I have seen some saying, don't have to study that because I can ask ChatGPT, I can ask AI assistants. So in a kind of way, they're saying this is a waste of time studying mathematics, any discipline, because there will be a kind of oracle that I can ask and have questions. Do you think this will impact? Because as you mentioned, people, the future leaders will be the ones that have great questions, not necessarily great answers. But the way, at least in the past, we were educated to have good questions is also to study and go deep dive in some topics. I'd like to see your point of view on that.
Yeah, I love this. I love this. And again, I don't know that I had the answer, but I certainly have a perspective to share here. I should probably caveat my whole response by saying, and you all may not know this about me, but I was supposed to be a historian. I have a master's degree in history. I dropped out of a PhD program in history. I got to Silicon Valley by first going to UC Berkeley to study to become a historian. 20 years later, most of what I do is talk about the future. But I still think that grounding in history, which is a discipline that encourages you to think about how we got to where we are and what paths were not taken. What were the alternatives? What are the contingencies? What are the systems and interdependencies that kind of determine today? I think that's a great frame for thinking about tomorrow. And so I will very often go to bat for some of these bodies of knowledge and some of these perspectives that have been somewhat devalued by the market. And I think very much in agreement with you here, that to know what the good questions are, you do have to have some familiarity with the answers that are known. You have to know a little bit about a field to know which questions are still worth exploring, what the good stuff is, where the rich unexplored spaces are. And that's something where I actually think that we don't want to discount the value of a pretty rich understanding of a domain or a landscape. I think asking good questions, especially when we put it in the context of new value creation for businesses, you have to know something about the industry. You also have to know something about the customer. And you have to have some knowledge so that you're able to then ask those rich questions. And I think if you don't have that knowledge of the space, it's going to be hard for you to come up with the right questions to ask. So I think it's a both and. Good.
It is very provocative, and HSM, which now stands for Heart, Soul, and Mind, has been advocating for a balance between two AIs,
Mm-hmm.
artificial intelligence combined and balanced with ancestral intelligence. How do you see that, and which are sort of things that you would thinking about intelligence that could be applied for leaders uh, to be best leaders from now on? I hear you say about wisdom, and I thinking about this new leader as a wise leader.
Mm-hmm.
How, and since you're a historian,
Story.
how to connect those things? Would you see it makes sense?
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity for me to say, I am not the person to ask about ancestral intelligence. And this is where the best thing that I could do in one of those conversations is actually probably step aside and turn to another leader who has a perspective that is very different from my own, an experience and a history that is different from my own, and make sure I'm listening. Um, since you're asking me in this moment, and I can speak maybe less about ancestral intelligence than the idea of taking the long view, making sure that we learn from history, and then we also think about the fact that there will be people who one day will see us as their history. And there's an idea that actually comes from a book that I like quite a bit called The Good Ancestor. This is by Roman Krznaric, philosopher. And the whole idea is that framing. What does it mean to be a good ancestor? What does it mean to be a steward of someone else's future? People that you might never meet, and I think that is a really rich frame already for us to think about. Are we being good stewards of their futures? And how can we be? How can we be better ones? How can we set tomorrow's leaders up to solve the problems that we either couldn't solve or maybe even created, and make sure that we're setting them up for success to the extent that we can, and make sure that we're understanding their perspective, because ultimately it's their future that we're kind of entrusted with first.
Coming back to companies and how they're managing AI, we're seeing a lot of companies adopting AI, but not necessarily changing their decision-making process, neither their culture to fit AI. So, in your experience and also in your opinion, what are the main mistakes that we can see in companies trying to adopt AI only as a tool, but not seeing actually the power in changing the decision-making process and also part of the culture?
Yeah. I think some of that is just that we're doing what's easy first. And the easy thing is to give everybody a tool, right? Even then, I think there's often a problem and kind of a gap that exists between we we say you have the tool, but we don't actually give you any training, any support for how to use it. And then a level beyond that is not just how you use it, but how we use it, how your use of the tool, yeah, and integrates with our development of the system. And I think the challenge here, which is also the opportunity, is to actually do the hard work of reimagining workflows and aligning workforce and workflow with an intentional vision of what this future can look like. What does the business model look like? What does value creation look like? And maybe in that case, even doing a little bit of designing backwards. How do we reimagine our workflow to best support that so that we're not just automating the thing as it exists today and then now spinning that on into perpetuity? Or maybe setting people up to do lots of new things, but not coordinating them. We have the potential right now to actually do more dumber things faster than we have ever done in the past. We have kind of a super agility that also needs us to exercise super alignment. I think we need to have strategic narratives about where the organization is going with their AI vision, and then making sure that everyone understands how their piece of that puzzle fits into the larger mosaic. That's not easy. That takes time and it takes a lot of hard work. But I think that's the piece that is kind of still really missing.
So, sorry. I think it also takes an open mind for different futures at the same time. And our management systems, they are not designed for futures in plural, you know, they're designed for a forecast. All this idea of opening the mind for different scenarios, right?
See, now we're really getting on our stuff here, Klausi. I love this. So let me add a little bit to that then. I think part of what we're seeing is that a lot of these tools and automation in general as an idea very often is deployed uh, in in the goal of increased efficiency, right? Doing the thing we already know how to do well, faster and more cheaply and at greater scale. And that's fine as far as it goes, but ultimately we need to not just do efficiency, we need to do learning. If we want to know what the new looks like, if we want to grow into that future, if we want to learn to support new value, not just the old value that we're eking out efficiency gains, that requires us to experiment. That requires us to make mistakes. That's how learning progresses, right? That's how science works. You got to make some mistakes. Organizations don't like to do that. And thinking about how do we design those experiments that are going to help us learn our way into a better AI future, I think is generally not what we're kind of optimized for organizationally. So it's a capacity to be developed, and it has cultural aspects, it has process aspects, but I think that's also where some of the most exciting opportunities lie.
That's great, Jeffrey. Well, adding to that, it seems that big organization has built their AI strategy. They are hiring their chief AI officer, so they seem to know what they're doing, especially working automation and reducing costs and so on. But my question is, how can we also push the agenda on with the small business owners? Because sometimes you see that sometimes I think that they will disappear, but sometimes I think, well, they have the best opportunity ever. So how can we push that agenda so smaller business become bigger, and we have more millionaires, billionaires like the like ever, the CEO of NVIDIA has saying, well, the next 5 years we have more and more than we ever seen. So sometimes it just does not seem very balanced.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really rich question. I think we can kind of think of a couple different components to this. In some ways, some smaller businesses actually have an advantage for the agility that they can exercise. It is actually easier often for them to explore a new thing and to redesign a process. They're often not as beholden to really complex legacy infrastructure that's been patched together over time and has to work in a lot of different environments. And so they actually, if they are leaning into experimentation and exploration, they might have an opportunity to realign for this AI-enabled future more quickly. I think what might be in some cases, the greater challenge for them is just lock in to certain platforms that maybe favor scale tremendously. And I mean, we talked just in passing at the very beginning of our conversation about the idea of uh, product discovery and the post search optimization in an agentic commerce environment. And those kinds of things I think could really disfavor small businesses, perhaps, where they may not have the same options for engagement at scale with large platforms, and they may be disadvantaged. And so I think there are a lot of ways that we could kind of approach that. But is this a great time for small business owners to be exploring and thinking big, thinking about where they can go? I think 100%.
Um, would like to know your perspective on creativity and AI.
You know what? I think it's actually time for me now, at least once, to just flip this on you all and ask yours first, and then I will gladly argue with you if we disagree.
Uh, my point of view is that it augments creativity,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll give you a real example at Global Scenography. And I have this testimony last December. We ended our AI festival at the studios, and one scenographer said that he has been paid to give his creativity to the company, and it was that the company gives back
Mm-hmm.
creativity. And what he really means is that in a typical show series, he presents to the artistic director maybe 3, 4 different options for scenography, and because it holds a certain effort and time to produce each one, he can produce 20 or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. And with AI, bring it to 10 options, but the real impact is not only the number of this, but with the interaction, how
Mm-hmm.
he can prove new ideas with the direction. And with this interaction, create I would say, a more powerful creativity solution for,
Mm-hmm.
for the demand that he had.
I appreciate that example. Um, I think some of the answer to this question is going to come down to how we define creativity and how we value different kinds of creative work. And there's a theory of creativity like innovation that's basically combinatorial in nature. That is, we take pieces of things that already exist and we put them in a new combination and we come up with a new thing. And that is something that I think almost by definition, these large language models are quite good at. They're quite good at combining things from a massive data set and probably coming up with not only lots of combinations, but maybe some novel combinations. And I think that's one thing. Sure. I think that using AI tools for iteration on something makes great sense. If we want a lot of versions of something, fantastic. When I do scenario work for clients, I will often work with Claude, spinning up a bunch of scenarios, and it can very quickly create way more than I could do in a flash. Now, before I actually take those to a client, I always spend time further differentiating them, making them deeper, making them weirder, making them more distinct from one another. Um, because oftentimes the ones that I get kind of fall into certain grooves, so to speak, and it makes sense. They are kind of composites of many different visions of the future that exist in the data set. They look a lot like visions of the future past, and I may want to push them a little bit further. That works well for me. I also do a lot of game design for clients, and I test my games with LLMs because I can have it simulate the responses of 500 people, 2,000 people. I can get an idea of where those might go. It's great for that kind of testing. Now, on the other hand, when I think about a different level of creative production, and I think about art that really moves me, this week, at some point when I have a free evening, I'm going to watch The Secret Agent, Brazilian film that I've not had a chance to see yet, but all my friends have told me it's fantastic. And when are we going to see something on that level of artwork that is produced entirely by an AI system? I don't think that that's coming anytime soon. I don't think we're going to get to that. And I'm not even sure if I would want to. Now, that is not the kind of work that 99% of us are doing. And I think right now we have the tools to kind of turbocharge that sort of combinatorial creativity, but I don't think it's going to get us to where we have things that are wildly original, that are totally unique and new under the sun. And I'm all right with that. I would love for that to continue to be the human domain. And that's kind of how I think about this.
And I agree, and that's the reason that I said augmenting,
Mhm.
not replacing.
Mm-hmm.
Humans in the center all the time.
We have some questions from the audience.
Ah,
So I will try to combine two in one. This question is, the leader of the future will not only be a strategist, but also a curator of possibilities, someone who connects technology, humanity, and purpose. What do you think about that? And
I like it. It sounds good.
and what are the main characteristics of a leader who seeks to better understand this AI content and so on?
Seeks to better understand.
To understand this dynamic and to be a better leader in this future
Mhm.
that we are living in.
Um, this is actually going to come a little bit back to something that we've been talking about quite a bit. And I really think it's going to be incredibly important for leaders and even more so perhaps innovators to deeply understand problems. We've talked about questions, but also deeply understanding the problem space, understanding the customer. All of those things I think are going to be really critical. That allows the leader to tap into some purpose of this is the thing I want to solve. These are the people that I want to solve for. That allows us to act with intention. It also allows us to make the most of the tools and capabilities we have because we really know what it is that we ultimately need to do. I think that's going to be a critical differentiator where perhaps intelligence of a certain sort becomes abundant. And we all have these really powerful tools that we can throw at problems, but we still have to understand what exactly the problem is. What is it that we're really solving for? Where have previous solutions fallen short? And I think that's going to be a really distinctive thing, is that deep level understanding of the problem, which then gets to understanding, well, what kind of data is required? What kind of tools do we actually need? And that gets back to that idea of curation and strategy and discernment. And I think really focusing that on deep understanding of the problem is maybe kind of the core for me.
Handle that. Well, so problem solving seems to be one of the key competences or leadership characteristics for the future. It is important now, but it seems to be more and more complex, more important. But what else? Well, I have a 13-year-old boy right now, and I asked him when he was even younger to learn coding and engineering and a lot of stuff at school and focus on mathematics. And right now we're talking about human competence, not. Would you address a little bit on that? Technical and human skills. What would be the most important for the future?
Well, about most important, and I'm not sure that,
Important.
yeah, I'm not sure that I want to get into like ranking them. Um, I think some of this should depend on where a young person wants to make their contribution. Where do they want to lead? What kind of organization or what kind of human community? And thinking about, in my mind, um, skills and meta skills that are transferable between different domains. To me, those are probably robust across a wide range of possible futures. These are things that we're going to be glad that we have no matter which version of the future we wind up with. When people say, well, now that we can vibe code or conversationally program, whatever you want to call it, maybe we don't need to learn to code anymore. But so far as I can tell, the people who are far and away, far and away making the most of those capabilities are people who actually do know how to code. They are programmers who are making the best use of conversational program. And they understand the difference between a vibe coded prototype and something that you could actually take to production. And I think it's important for a leader or someone to be able to understand what that gap is and how do we cross it, right? Otherwise, you wind up eventually kind of paying the vibe tax at some point. And if you pay it way down the line, you're setting yourself up for a much more complex problem to untangle than if at the beginning you have an understanding of how far these tools can get us, and then what do we need to close that gap to get this thing into production at scale. So I think that's probably a piece of it. I don't think that we should say that we're in a hurry to phase out all those different fields of knowledge.
One of the most important topics, in my opinion, of our executive program is the strategic foresight training. So I know that you're futurist, so I think it would be great to hear from you the importance to deal with uncertainty in this world that we're living in and how to navigate in uncertainty, especially when technology is kind of making everybody anxious about the future.
This is great. So now I have time to do like a 90-minute masterclass. So the short version of this is that one of the things we absolutely know for certain about the future is that we are going to continue to deal with uncertainty, probably more uncertainty. If you look at like the last 35 years, where we've had the rise of big data and predictive analytics and increasingly powerful and sophisticated AI systems, have we driven uncertainty out of our organizational need for planning and understanding? No. In fact, I think most leaders would say that they're probably living at the most uncertain time in human history. And they might not be wrong. And I don't think that's likely to change. So the first question is, well, what can change? And I think part of that is the way that we relate to uncertainty. And rather than seeing it as something that we should always be trying to eliminate so that we can predict the future with the 5-year plan, instead understand uncertainty as opportunity and possibility.
And part of the system.
Yeah, and an irreducible part, probably, of a complex and highly interconnected world. And once we can start to see uncertainty, this idea that we don't know what's going to happen, and that envisioning the future is always an act of imagination, we can start to ask how we get better at it, be able to see a range of possible futures, understanding some of the things that might be influencing or driving them, and start to explore what our opportunities in each might be. Start to ask, well, across that range, even amid uncertainty, what are some of the things that I could start doing today that my future self would be likely to thank me for, that would be beneficial in a number of different versions of the future? That allows us to get a little bit closer to the opportunity that is the upside of uncertainty. And then we have a place to focus our curiosity. And I think we were talking about what's good for the next generation of leaders, what's good for the current leader, what's good for the team, what's good for the person who's like, holy crap, I don't really know what to do with all this stuff that I'm hearing about. Well, one thing that you can do is get your hands on. I think one of the messages we've tried to push in all of my time at Singularity is that the technologies aren't just becoming more powerful and cheaper, they're also becoming easier to use, right? This is one of the huge things that is happening in AI, is that we have better interfaces. We have tools that now they're pretty intuitive in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so that suggests to me there's never been a better time to be curious than right now. And if we are, as our mutual friend Pascal Finet believes, standing on the verge of like a bifurcation of intelligence, You and your organization don't want to be on the wrong side of that bifurcation because you weren't curious enough. So this is a great time to follow that curiosity into uncertainty, to explore, and to find in possibility new opportunity.
Thank you, Jeff. Obrigada, gente, todo mundo que ficou aqui com a gente até o final. Obrigada ao Jeff, ao Guilherme, ao Carlos Otávio, por essa discussão tão rica, tão importante, com tantos insights valiosos. E eu acho que esse papo aqui de hoje, ele só confirma o que eu costumo dizer, que a gente precisa de estratégia de automatização, de uma estratégia de aprendizagem, de adaptabilidade, seja para as organizações, seja... E é tem aqui no Brasil, a gente tem desenvolvido vários programas em company e abertos, entre eles o Executive Program, que temos o Jeff como nosso facilitador principal, Camp. E essa noite, para quem ficou aqui até o final com a gente tem uma condição especial, um bundle de IA, que é uma condição especial para o IP de maio, Executive Program, AI Bootcamp, e mais um bônus, mentoria privada, individual, para decisões baseadas em IA. Então, quem quiser saber sobre essa oferta, é só comentar no link da bio ou ali no comentário mesmo, colocar live, que vocês receberão essa oferta especial. Obrigada a todos vocês, toda a audiência que ficou com a gente aqui até agora. Espero vocês para novas conversas. Obrigada aqui a todo mundo que orientou aqui a gente, que deu tantos insights. Uma boa noite para vocês e até a próxima.